Morning everyone. Well, it's morning for me. Today, I thought I'd do a little video to enlighten you all on the magical, mystical, mysterious world of CDM paperwork. Let's go. There we go. What's up peeps? Welcome back to Rebranding Safety. Rebranding Safety is a YouTube channel and podcast doing exactly what it says on the tin. My name is James MacPherson, I'm the MD and lead consultant of Riskfluent, and today we're going to be talking all about CDM paperwork because it's a bit of a weird old world out there. So let's get right into it. The first thing you're going to come across in a CDM process, which if you're not sure about what that applies to, make sure you're going to check out our other videos on CDM, but this technically applies to everything. Now the depth and complexity of the paperwork varies with the risk and complexity of the project, which we'll go into some more at the end of the video in my top tips. So the first thing you're going to come across is pre-construction information. In the legislation it says that the client must provide this pre-construction information as soon as is possible. Now in most cases the client doesn't really know what they need to do, which is where the principal designer steps in to help them out. But first, what is pre-construction information? That's going to be things like location of underground services, location of overhead services, asbestos, normal site risk assessments, anything to do with the location, with the building. Could be environmental, could be safety, could be absolutely anything. The builders, the designers, the contractors and designers, so to speak, to use CDM terms, need to know about the property. So for example, if you're doing a big lifting operation, you may need to do a bit of an extra survey on the ground to see if the crane and the ground construction, e.g. the concrete, can take the weight of what you're trying to lift and so on. Now in a lot of cases the principal designer steps in to help the client out. Now this varies. If you're dealing with a big kind of commercial project, maybe it's like a big business trying to build a new building or something, typically they're going to have like a safety team that know what they're talking about. But more often than not, the client actually has very little idea what they need to provide and where they're going to get it and how they're going to give it and so on. And the principal designer really needs to coach the client, make sure they're aware of their duties and help them fulfill those duties. So in a nutshell, that is the first piece of paperwork you're going to come across, pre-construction information. And in my opinion, it is probably the second most important pieces of information you're going to get. Some would say the top, and I suppose it doesn't really matter, but it's phenomenally important. Pre-construction information is so important. Predominantly it's a legal requirement for the client to do it, but the principal designer often ends up stepping in, hold their hand and coach them through. There's going to be anything to do with the property, the grounds, the building and so on that exists before the construction phase starts. Packing. So I'm on the road today to go to a client, help them out with RAMs, which is a very important piece of paperwork. But before we get into RAMs, the next one is the F10. But before we get onto the F10, it's really important to note that if the principal designer is carrying out the duties of the client, they need to put that in writing. It's got to be in writing that the principal designer is carrying out the duties of the client. Now, that's really common in domestic projects. Really, really common. There's nothing wrong with that. So the F10 applies if the project is notifiable. And what that means is the project is big enough, essentially, or long enough that the HSE, the enforcer in the UK, are interested. Now I've got that written down because I always forget. What that is that if it lasts longer than 30 working days and has more than 20 workers working at the same time at any point throughout the project, or exceeds more than 500 person days. Quite simple, can never remember it though. If the client is commercial, then they must notify the HSE, and then if they're domestic, then the contractor does it, or the principal contractor if there's more than one, or the principal designer can do it if there's a written agreement saying that they do it. So a really important thing to note here, teamwork people, gotta work together, it's not us and them, got to work together if you want this to succeed, but that's more into one of my top tips. I need to pack, I need to get on the road. That's my really OCD travel case, I wanna call it that. It's not even fully packed. Geek. The next piece of documentation is the construction phase plan. The construction phase plan is an interesting document, big document. It's actually a collection of documents. It's required before the construction phase starts. It's provided by the principal contractor, and it's required for every project. Now here is where you got to apply a bit of common sense, which is why you need to listen to the end of this video. What's really common is we do the construction phase plan and we don't look at it again. Got to keep it up to date. The construction phase plan is going to detail absolutely everything about how you're doing the job, the risk management of the job, the welfare provisions, the emergency planning. It's basically, if you imagine in normal safety, we call it a health and safety management system. So like you would go into a factory, you get their policies, their procedures, their risk assessments, their training matrix, all of that stuff. Basically that's a construction phase plan. It's how you're doing the whole job, what you need to do, where you need to do it, and how you're managing the risks of that and what you're gonna do if something goes wrong. Don't forget site fire risk assessment, commonly forgotten. Don't forget welfare. You've got to provide welfare. Also don't forget access and egress, and don't forget access and egress for the emergency services as well. So important. Typically this is a really big document or a really big collection of documents, but essentially it is the management system, the health and safety management system for the construction project.
Oh, I thought the car wasn't going to start then. Okay, so what I believe is the most important piece of paperwork in a construction project is the RAMs. And I also think they're one of the worst done pieces of paperwork in a construction project. RAMs are probably what we spend most of our work with our clients doing, perfecting, helping them work how to do it and balance this whole like being specific whilst at the same time not regurgitating the same old thing every time. It's really hard to get these right. It's really, really hard to get them right. And if I'm honest, it's because we're a bit addicted to just a one solution for everything, when actually you need a bit of everything. You need a way to just move and flex to each kind of project, which is probably, again, the most important piece of information in my top tip, which again, I keep hinting to you, don't I? But I'm gonna hold off on that. But the RAMs stands for risk assessment and method statement. Risk assessment and method statement. What that means is how you're doing the job. Method statement of your method, how you're doing the job, what you're doing it, who's doing it, where you're doing it, blah blah blah, the scope of works. It's got loads of different phrases, but ultimately it's a sequence of how you're doing things and how you want it to be done. Risk assessment, typically the most important piece of information in any health and safety risk management world, but ultimately typically the worst piece of process. We're so bad at it, basically. We are so bad at risk assessments. No matter whether you're in construction, manufacturing, doesn't matter. All of us are bad at risk assessments, in my opinion. Risk assessments and method statements are basically normally delivered as one document, but it's technically two. It's how you're managing the risk and how you're doing the job. These vary. So if you're in a trade-based role and you're watching this video, you will know exactly what RAMs are, and you will be asked for them even though it's not like a construction phase plan type project, even though it technically applies to all, which is where this starts getting real messy, which I'll cover it off at the end. But in its simplest form, risk assessment and method statement is what are called RAMs. They deserve their own video, they will get their own video, but they form part of the construction phase plan, and who will do them will be the contractor for that job. So imagine you're building a house, right? You're gonna have a brickie, you're gonna have a roofer, you're gonna have a sparky, you're gonna have a plumber. All of these people, they will all issue their own RAMs. So it's the responsibility of each individual contractor, to deliver their own RAMs, but it's the responsibility of the construction principal contractor to make sure that everybody's got their own RAM. Now, what's really common in this process as well is called a PQQ process, which is where you basically pre-qualifying questionnaire, it's called. It's basically where you grill a load of contractors on their information. Do you have this badge? Do you have that badge? So on and so on. Now this, I feel sorry for contractors on this, and again, this probably deserves its own video, because all of these subcontractors and contractors, they're asked to have all of these badges, which is basically PQQ, and then they're asked to do a PQQ again, and then they're probably asked to do another PQQ by somebody else in the same fucking project. But whatever, you can tell I get a bit wound up about this. But RAMs are risk assessment method statements. They are the requirement of the contractor. They're the requirement of everyone doing any work, essentially, not visitors and so on. They would fall under how whoever's owning the site would have a risk assessment and method statement for managing visitors and so on and so forth. Hopefully that makes sense. So I've had a bit of a garish drive home, and I was running late and it's really snowy and icy, so I didn't record any of the rest of this video. So we covered RAMs, which, yeah, I'm a bit passionate about. We do a lot of work on RAMs with a lot of customers, and they are phenomenally important, but they do deserve a video in their own right, so I'm going to do that. So last but not least, because I think this is one of the most, you know what, I'm not going to give an opinion yet, I'm going to save till the tips and comments at the end. So the next one is the health and safety file. So a lot of people misunderstand what this is. Essentially, this is like everything that you've done in the building process, you have to hand over to the client once you've finished, right? So it's not actually the health and safety file for the project, it's health and safety file for the building. It's everything that you put in there, the manufacturer instructions, how to maintain it, clean it, and so on. It's gonna have fire strategy drawings in there, which are really important for people like us as well that come along and do the fire assessment afterwards. Gonna have hopefully as-built drawings, but this is one of the things where we fall down on. Typically the as-designed drawings in. Very rarely do we update the drawings to give as-built drawings, which is a massive pain in the ass. Interestingly, the health and safety file is produced by the principal designer, but it's delivered at the end of the project. Now, sometimes the principal designer has done the job and fucked off by that point. So, but there are ways around that and how we can deal with that. So during the pre-construction phase, the principal designer must kind of prepare that health and safety file. So essentially it's made before the job starts, and all you have to do is tweak it and change it for what's changed from the design to as built, hence as built drawings I was mentioning earlier. So really nothing should change in theory. Unlike a lot of the other documents that we've mentioned in there, the health and safety file actually isn't required on every construction project. It must be produced on any project where there's more than one contractor, and that includes subcontractors as well, right? So if there's more than one contractor building the job, then you are required to have a health and safety file. Whenever essentially a principal designer is also appointed, so those two align. So the easy flag for you in your head, if there's a PD, you need a health and safety file. Principal designer, health and safety file. A principal contractor and other contractors and designers all need to provide their information. So everyone's got a duty to make sure they're providing the information to that health and safety file. And where the principal designer has finished and their contract is over before the end of the construction phase, which is actually quite often in my experience, then they can pass the duty over to the principal contractor. Same thing, contractor will just essentially produce a health and safety file, hand it over to the client once the job is done. Okay, my top tips and comments. CDM paperwork or construction paperwork in general is, I'm sorry, shit. It's shit. It's absolutely shit. Anyone who works in safety and construction is talking about safety paperwork, you are kidding yourself if you think if you're doing a good job. Honestly, it's terrible. The way you treat subcontractors if you're a big contractor is disgusting. A lot of our clients are subcontractors and they're forced to race to the bottom. They're demanded loads of standards. They're forced to just collect badges and so on. It's shocking. So my first top tip for anyone working in safety and construction is have a look in the mirror. Really just have an honest conversation with yourself and really ask yourself, is this process actually helping? Is it actually making the job safer? Because I don't think it is. Next
top tip. The depth and complexity of the paperwork is proportionate to the risk and complexity of the project. Stop forcing small contractors doing small works to have huge amounts of paperwork. You are disillusioning them from safety, and then when it's time for them to do something that's really important for safety, they don't do it because they're fed up, because they've been battered by the requirements of big business, big safety teams, making them jump through hoops left, right and centre for no reason. The paperwork for CDM should be proportionate to the risk and complexity of the project. And if you think I'm making that up, it's on the fucking HSE website, people.
It's on the website.
I get quite passionate about this. My last top tip, it's kind of related to the first one, but please can we stop asking, particularly subcontractors in contractor approval and so on, can we stop asking them to just do the same thing over and over and over and over again? And it is unbelievable. SSIP is a great scheme as a collective, but the way it is utilised is horrendous. So if you don't know what SSIP is, it's CHAS, it's SMAS, it's Safe Contractors, Acclaim, Construction Line, all of these SSIP accreditations. Now these are supposed to act as a kind of PQQ process, right? It's supposed to act like a way of approving that they're a good contractor, right? You've done your due diligence, so to speak. They've got risk assessments, they've got policies, procedures. They are audited by the SSIP approved body like CHAS and so on. Having more than one of those badges means nothing. They're all the same. They are all the same. Some of them will claim to be better than others, and in my opinion, it's just a marketing ploy. If you do want a better one, I would look for one that does a face-to-face audit of the system, but even then, having more than one, nothing. Stop asking contractors to do that. This is not Scouts for Safety, where you're collecting a freaking sash of I've got this badge and I've got that badge. And additionally, on top of that, if you're asking them to have all of that stuff, why are you forcing them to go through massive PQQ processes with your own freaking spreadsheet that says, do you have CHAS? Yes. Okay, great.
Can you now send me all the information that you also sent Chad so that I can look at it from my own opinion?
Stop asking them to have CHAS or the other equivalents of CHAS and then asking for all the information they've been audited on in CHAS. Honestly, the way we manage risk in construction is just collection of paperwork. We're hoarders of paperwork, and we need to have an honest conversation with ourselves. So, top tip, CDM paperwork, have a word. Hopefully that's explained all the paperwork of CDM. You could do an individual video on all of them, to be fair, but RAMS definitely deserves a video of its own, and I will do that. But otherwise, it's time for my oven pizza. I'll catch you next week. If you need any help with this stuff, check out riskfluentltd.com, or you can email me, James, at riskfluentltd.com. We do a lot of this stuff, helping out customers, trying to declutter their process, help them to actually manage a risk within their construction projects. So if you need some help, let me know. Otherwise, I'll catch you next week. Safe.